motion be agreed to. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to Eric Roy for those comments. Can I say for a start that the Labour Party will be supporting this bill to select committee, but we do so with some reservations because there are some hooks in the principles that underlie this bill that we want to work through. It may well be that it's right, but there are some things that we need to check. Can I say to the people of Stewart Island that some of you have got long enough memories will know me as the tar baby, because in 1980 I was down there improving your infrastructure, sealing roads, when I had actually a terrible accident and was covered in luckily cold mixed tar, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you, and had some other injuries too that will no doubt be probably memorable to not just me but to some of the other people down there who helped me after that accident. But can I say that the issues here relating to infrastructure costs being disproportionate to ratepayer base are not solely issues for Stewart Island. I readily acknowledge what Eric Roy has said, that there's only around 400 residents, 451 ratepayers, many of whom won't be residents, they'll be holidaymakers down there with holiday homes, and 36,000 visitors per annum is the number that Eric Roy has given to the House. So I can see that the ratepayer base of Stewart Island alone to fund things like toilets, sewage infrastructure, fresh water, roading improvements is very small. I think we have to, though, consider these things a little bit more widely than we have already. It is notable, and this is no criticism of Eric Roy or the local proponents of the bill, but because it's a local bill, we actually don't have a regulatory impact statement, and we haven't yet had fulsome consideration as to what are the macro effects or the wider effects of introducing local levies in respect of infrastructure. And I know from my time in Parliament until now, when I was before Jackie Dean was the Member of Parliament for Otago and then Waitaki, I was the Member of Parliament for Otago. And similar issues were periodically raised by Queenstown, where they have a small ratepayer base relative to the huge number of tourists that they have in Queenstown. And you might think, well, it's a bit different in Queenstown compared with Stewart Island, and it no doubt is, but in some ways there are also similarities. They have enormous infrastructure costs because they have a huge visitor numbers of visitors, and it impacts upon the infrastructure that they have to maintain for their periods of peak. When the number of tourists that are in town hits a peak, they have to have infrastructure that is necessary for that peak number of tourists, but not necessary for most of the rest of the time. And so they have, on occasion, said that they need some special rules to either collect a visitor levy, to have a share of GST. It's been proposed to have some special levy imposed at the airport. All of these things are trying to raise money in order to build infrastructure that they say is beyond the cost of the local ratepayer to fund. Now, that may or may not be true, and I'm not sure that we're yet ready to conclude that that is correct, and I think we need to hear from the Ministry of Economic Development, perhaps the Treasury, and certainly the Ministry of Tourism as to what they think of these issues. It is true that the Stewart Island ratepayers have great difficulty in meeting these costs. Stewart Island is not a district council. It is the Southland District Council. And I think there is a proper question to be asked as to whether the benefits of tourism without these sorts of levies are greater than with these sorts of levies. I don't know the answer to that question, but if the answer to that question is that tourism would be inhibited for the Southland region, then maybe there is a case for the Southland District to be funding these things from all of their ratepayers across the Southland District to a certain extent for the benefit of making these infrastructural improvements on Stewart Island, not just to the benefit of Stewart Island, but to the benefit of the whole of the economy of the Southland District. So I think these issues are not quite as simple as they may appear at first blush. Having said that, I have great sympathy for the position of the Stewart Island ratepayers because the position does appear to be untenable as it currently is. I'm just not sure that this is the best solution. I'm not saying it's not. That's why the Labor Party is supporting this to Select Committee, and it may well be the best solution, but I think it is very important because there is an important point of principle here that is of a widespread application across the rest of New Zealand, not just Stewart Island. I've mentioned the example of Queenstown. I also have seen many other smaller localities where they have similar problems, where if this becomes allowed on Stewart Island, we will have people saying "me too" and saying that those same rules should be applied there. So I think we have to look at whether the underlying principle of this is right very, very carefully, because let's not forget, tourism is our second largest generator of foreign exchange in New Zealand after the pastoral sector, and we must take care that we are not going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg through an inappropriate rule that we might inflict upon ourselves from here. So members opposite might say that these are not real issues, but I know from when I looked at these issues in respect of Queenstown, and I advocated on their behalf when I was the MP for Queenstown, I came up upon considerable resistance from out of various government ministries who pointed out that there were some strong countervailing arguments against this. Now, I wasn't in a position to actually have enough information to conclude whether the councils were right or whether those countervailing points of view were right, but I was convinced that there were some complex issues here that needed to be unpicked. So when this goes to Select Committee, I would encourage the government to make available the relevant ministries that have this expertise, because without that expertise, the Select Committee could make a decision which could adversely affect a very important national interest, which is the viability of our tourism industry. With those comments, Mr. Speaker, reinforcing again that we don't have the normal protections that we have when government introduces legislation that would have already been through all of those ministries before it made it to the floor of Parliament. It would have had a regulatory impact statement as to the effect of those changes after that departmental analysis by the Ministry of Economic Development, the Department of Tourism, no doubt other ministries like the Ministry for the Environment would say, well, look, we might need this for environmental protection of the marine environment because otherwise we're going to have raw sewage pouring into the sea and that would be irrelevant. All of those things would have been consulted upon by the government department that was proposing the legislation before it came to this House, and all of those things would have informed the regulatory impact statement that would have been prepared by, is it the Treasury now, isn't it? It used to be MED, it's now the Treasury. Before that regulatory impact statement would have been available to members, that regulatory impact statement would have been available to members to consider these issues even before we had a first reading of the bill. So, I encourage members opposite, Jackie Dean, who's the member for Waitaki, and these issues are going to have import for Queenstown as well as for Stewart Island, for communities like Te Anau, Milford Sound. This is, beg your pardon? Well, in a different sort of a way, yeah. Mr. Roy says it already happens there, but not quite in the way that it is proposed here via a council imposed or a council imposed levy. So the absence of the regulatory impact statement and those processes before we get to this point makes me nervous that we could make a mistake. That nervousness could well be allayed by appropriate advice from government departments at Select Committee, and accordingly the Labor Party supports the first reading of this in reference to Select Committee and thanks the member for Invercargill to bringing it to the House on behalf of the Southland District Council.